Welcome to Pankinen Financial Perspective with Ashton Pankinen from Pankinen Financial Group. Planning for your financial future means navigating challenges like market volatility, inflation, and retirement income. Pankinen Financial Perspective is here to help by addressing common financial concerns, sharing valuable strategies, and exploring ways you can work toward your financial goals. Now let's get started with Pankinen Financial Perspective.
Hello and welcome to the Pankinen Financial Perspective. My name is Ashton Pankinen from Pankinen Financial Group. If you'd like more information about what you hear during our show today, give us a call at 952-873-2703 or visit us online at pankinenfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN financial.com. And while at my website, click on the radio page to check out past shows and to subscribe to our program on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Also, while at my page, click the link at the top to get the latest retirement guide. Tax season doesn't usually top anyone's list of favorite times of the year, but for some retirees, filing taxes this year may come with a little less stress thanks to a new senior deduction that was introduced during President Trump's recent legislation called the Big Beautiful Bill. Now, whenever something new shows up on tax code, it tends to generate a lot of attention, and understandably so. If you're retired or approaching retirement, you want to know whether a change like this could potentially reduce what you owe or increase what you're able to keep. But as always, the key is to understanding the details. Today, we're going to walk through 4 important things you want to understand if you're considering taking advantage of the senior deduction as you prepare to file your taxes this year. Much of our information for this conversation comes from a recent USA Today article headlined 4 Things Retirees Need to Know About the New Senior Tax Deduction. And to help keep today's shows both informative and fun, I'm joined by my co-host, Tony Shore.
All right. Well, thanks for the great introduction there, Ashton. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
Even though we are talking about taxes, I know it is on a lot of people's minds. And the good news here is we're talking about how to minimize your tax burden and some things you need to know now for this year's taxes and moving forward. There's a lot happening out there, so I'm glad you're going to give us our take. But first, I don't know if you set your alarm and got up early this last Sunday morning to watch that men's USA Olympic hockey game, but that was a hockey game, Ashley.
I can't believe I missed it.
It was so good.
I had a friend message me about the game, and I'm like, I completely forgot about it. I spaced it out, hanging out with the kids in the morning, and yeah.
But you heard about it. You saw
I heard
highlights.
about it, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it was an intense, probably one of the most intense and just full speed hockey games I've ever seen. I mean, both those teams wanted to win badly, and they had way more shots on our goal. I mean, our goalie really won it for us, but that guy, Jack Hughes, who made the final shot, it was a great shot. And the pass to him was like a miracle pass. Like, it was perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better ending in overtime. And the women's hockey team, another big overtime win against Canada as well. I mean, I'd hate to be a Canadian right now.
It'd be tough, really tough right now. Yeah.
And I know when Rob Curvin and he lives in Chicago, and he's born and raised in Canada, but he's a financial advisor like yourself in Chicago. And I immediately text him because him and his family are from, he's a huge hockey fan, and he's a big Canada fan, right? For Canadian hockey. So I said, yay, go Team USA. And I put a picture of the hockey team celebrating. Nothing for about an hour and a half. And then a thumbs down. Thumbs down. Haven't heard from him since. He may not.
You may never hear from him again.
Right. Right. Well, let's jump into our topic for today, because I know it's a big one: retirement taxes, money moves. Yeah. And I think a lot of people think, hey, you said a new tax deduction. They might think it's a huge break, or they assume it's so complicated they won't understand it. But let's talk about who qualifies and how it fits into an overall retirement picture.
Yeah, let's kick things off with the most important question: who actually does qualify for this new senior tax deduction? Because, before we talk about how it works, it may help. We want to understand how it applies to or who it applies to, I guess. So under current rules, you can claim this new senior deduction if you're age 65 or older at the end of 2025. That age requirement is the first threshold. Beyond age, there's a couple of additional requirements. You got to provide your social security number on your tax return, and you must fall within certain income limits based on your modified adjusted gross income, which is often referred to as MAGI or MAGI. So for an individual filer, that income limit is $75,000 or less. And then for married couples filing jointly, it's $150,000 or less. So again, if your MAGI falls within those limits, you may be eligible to claim that new senior deduction. And then if your income is above those thresholds, that doesn't mean you automatically are excluded entirely. You may still qualify for a reduced deduction, or in some cases, you may not qualify for this new deduction at all. So it's important, even if your income exceeds those limits, that you can still claim the senior tax deduction that was in place before the new legislation passed. And so this isn't an all or nothing situation, but eligibility does depend heavily on age and your income.
Yeah, and I'm glad you clarified that, Ashton, because when some people hear income limit, they sometimes assume it's either a hard cutoff, like you're either fully in or fully out. But that isn't the case here, is it?
Exactly. And tax rules are rarely that simple. That's why it's so important not to rely on some news headline or quick summary. Your specific income level, your filing status, and even how your income is structured can influence whether you qualify for a full deduction, a reduced amount, or just the existing senior deduction that's already available. And this is where the planning becomes so important, because modified adjusted gross income isn't always the same as what people casually think of as their income. It's a specific calculation used for tax purposes. So when I sit down with clients, Tony, we don't just look at one number in isolation. We look at the full picture, including how income sources interact, where adjustments come from, and whether there are opportunities to be intentional about how that income is actually reported.
Yeah, and to me, this is one of those moments when understanding the mechanics really makes a difference.
It absolutely does, especially in retirement, where income can come from several different places. And the way those pieces fit together can affect not only deductions like this one, but just that overall tax strategy.
Yeah. So now that we understand who may qualify, the next question people are wondering is, how much is this actually worth? And I think this is pretty impressive. This is important.
Yeah, and that's probably where most people's minds go next. The new senior deduction is worth up to $6,000 for an individual or $12,000 for married couples. But in order for that married couple to claim $12,000 amount, they do have to file jointly. So it's important to remember that this tax deduction is not a tax credit. That distinction does matter. A deduction reduces your taxable income. It does not reduce your tax bill dollar for dollar the way a credit would. So instead, it lowers the amount of income that is subject to tax. So let's just use a simple example. If you're a single filer with a taxable income of $60,000, before applying this new deduction and you qualify for the full $6,000 amount, your taxable income would drop to $54,000 after the deduction is applied. And so again, that's lower taxable income could potentially result in a lower overall tax liability. And then for some seniors, it may translate into a larger refund, just depending on how much was withheld or paid throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, this is, I don't think people realize how significant this can be, because we're talking about the 2026 standard deduction. I'm looking at it right now. If you're married filing jointly, it's $32,200. Right. Yes. Yep. And we'll add up these numbers here really quick, because I think this is huge. So let's take the 32,200, right? 32,200, and I'm going to add that to let's see here. It's $1,650 is the senior tax deduction that everyone still gets, $1,650.
Yep.
That's for married filing jointly. I don't think that's per person. It might be per person, though.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. We'll just add it in once. But then I'm going to add the $12,000 for married filing jointly, and that's the $1,650 and the $12,000 is only if you're 65 and older.
Correct.
But for a couple 65 and older, the total deduction from your taxes you'll get for this year in 2026, $45,850.
Yeah, that's big.
And I talked to my parents' tax person, because I help with their taxes now.
Yep.
And they won't pay any taxes. A lot of people in retirement won't pay taxes because of that. That's a pretty big standard deduction, and it will lower a lot of other people's taxes, right?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everybody's that's 65 and older is going to get that lower income tax.
Right. But I'm glad you're talking about the difference, though. But that's not a tax credit. You don't get a credit of $45,000. That would be, some people hear the 12,000 and they think, wow, that's what I'm going to get back from the government. No, that's a common misunderstanding, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great insight. It is a common misunderstanding. The 6 or 12,000, if you're filing jointly, that reduces that taxable income. Again, the actual savings depends on your specific tax bracket and that overall situation. So, and again, that's why it's so important not to assume what the outcome will be without actually running the numbers. So for some retirees, this deduction may meaningfully reduce what they owe. For others, it may be a little more modest, but either way, it's something worth understanding and factoring into your broader tax planning conversation.
Yeah, and depending, again, how much income you're making in retirement, it might not be life-changing money for everybody, but it's also because maybe you weren't paying much in taxes anyway, or maybe you have to pay a lot anyway. But it is something you don't want to overlook, and you want to be able to plan for it too, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, Tony. In retirement, even incremental improvements in tax efficiency can really add up over time. And we're building that long-term income strategy. We look for every opportunity to manage taxable income. We want to do it thoughtfully, especially when new provisions like this become available.
Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about this. And now here's something I think, though, that surprises people when they do hear about this deduction. It's not permanent.
Correct.
Right? We're not going to get this every year for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, not at this point. It is a critical detail. The legislation introduced this new senior deduction only created for tax years 2025 through 2028. So as of now, it's temporary. And we simply don't know what will happen after this window closes. Future legislation could make it permanent. Lawmakers could choose to extend it for another set period of time, or it could be allowed to expire altogether. At this point, it's uncertain.
Yeah, and I love how it does take effect for last year's taxes. So when you're filing right now, between now and April, this is something you can get this additional deduction if you're 65 and older. But it isn't something retirees should automatically build into their long-term plans as a forever benefit, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and whenever we're dealing with temporary tax provisions, the key word is flexibility. If you qualify and it's available, it may provide some relief during those eligible years, but it's important to assume or not to assume that it's always going to be there.
Right.
And that's where thoughtful strategizing comes in. When I work with clients, we don't just look at this year in isolation. We look at how today's tax environment fits into a longer term retirement income strategy. So, if a deduction like this is available for several years, we account for it, but we also stress test the plan under the assumption that it may not be continued beyond its scheduled time frame. So, for example, I'm meeting with some clients now, and we're talking about doing Roth conversions or maybe extra distributions out of their IRA account because they are getting that extra deduction in income. So let's say it's a married couple filing jointly. They get $12,000. Maybe we take an extra $12,000 as a distribution because they're going to get that deduction anyways. So just something you want to think about.
Right. And it comes down to planning ahead, plan for both possibilities. And before we keep going with our conversation today, why don't you let our people out there know, the listeners, how they can schedule that no charge, no obligation consultation if they want to ask questions or get more information?
Yeah, again, the best way to do it is to give our office a call, 952-873-2703. Again, that number is 952-873-2703. Or visit us online at pankininfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN financial.com. Scheduling a consultation only takes a few minutes, and we're always happy to work around your schedule.
A lot of great information so far. So what do you want to talk about next?
Yeah, so earlier in the show, we focused on tax issues that matter for people who are already retired, like the new senior tax deduction and how it works. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about people nearing retirement. So there's some great details in a Fidelity article, which is headlined In or Near Retirement, 7 High-Impact Money Moves for 2026. So these are practical actions that can help shape your financial security, not just this year, but into your retirement years.
So what's the first move that you would recommend here?
Yeah, the first move involves something that may sound simple, and it's reinvesting or revisiting whether you should itemize deductions on your tax return or not. So in recent years, many people have defaulted into taking that standard deduction. But depending on your situation, especially if you're in higher tax states or have meaningful deductible expenses, itemizing still may make sense. So this is particularly relevant for people nearing retirement who still may have mortgage interest, do some of those charitable contributions, or have significant state and local taxes.
So it's not just about running on autopilot then.
Yeah, that's right, Tony. Tax law changes, personal situations change, income levels change, and what worked for you 3 years ago may not be that optimal today. So sometimes the difference isn't dramatic, but sometimes it is. And in the years leading up to retirement, every opportunity to manage taxable income thoughtfully does matter.
Okay. What's the next money move you have for us?
Yeah, the second move ties back to what we discussed earlier, and that's that new senior deduction. If you're 65 or older, even if you're still working or just easing into retirement, understanding how this deduction can interact with your broader tax strategy is very important. The key point here is coordination. It's not about just claiming one deduction. It's about understanding how the deductions, income sources, and withdrawal strategies can all fit together.
That's a good point, because there are people who work past 65, and I didn't really think about that new senior deduction. I never thought about those people still working who might be 65 and older, how it does apply to them. You don't have to be retired to get it. So I think that's good. And so I guess in the end, someone might technically qualify for it. But the bigger question is, how does it fit into my personal overall picture where I'm at? Right.
Yeah, precisely. Retirement planning isn't just about isolated decisions. It's about alignment with the whole strategy.
Yeah. And next, I wanted to ask you about something a little more strategic, but I don't think we can talk about taxes or minimizing your tax burden without talking about Roth conversions, right? Yeah. I know you love to talk about Roth conversions. What do you have on that?
Yeah, so a Roth conversion involves moving funds from a traditional tax deferred account into a Roth account. So you pay the taxes on the amount converted today, but future qualified withdrawals can be tax-free. So for someone nearing retirement, this can be particularly powerful during the years when income is temporarily lower. For example, if you retire at 63 but delay Social Security until age 67, there may be a window where your taxable income dips for a while there. And that window can sometimes present an opportunity to convert funds at that lower tax rate. And as I mentioned a little earlier in the show, again, with this additional deduction of the $12,000, maybe that's an opportunity to move some of that.
Yeah. And, tax rates are really the brackets are at all-time lows. And like you say, if you're in a position where maybe your income has lowered a bit, it can be an opportunity to make that Roth conversion, pay some of those taxes now so it can continue to grow tax-free. And that way you won't have to pay taxes on the growth. Otherwise you would. Yeah. But this isn't something you just do casually. You need to think about it, make sure it fits your situation, and work with somebody like yourself before making that move, right?
Yeah, for sure. You do want to do that, because once you convert, you can't undo it. You're choosing to accelerate taxes into the present instead of in the future there. And so again, it gives you that flexibility, tax flexibility in the future. It requires modeling, not just guessing, because Roths certainly aren't solid fit for every financial strategy. It's essential to discuss them with a financial professional before any final decisions are made. I often say, we look at trying to pay as much tax in the 12% tax bracket as we can. And again, people say, hey, I don't want to pay tax. But again, if we can get it at 12%, I think that's a pretty good discount on our taxes.
Yeah. And I think we all agree that at some point it's got to go up to cover that national debt.
Correct.
And taxes will go up in the future at some point. Another major move that I wanted to ask you about, and that I know is at the core of what you do to help people and where we're headed with all this, and that's building a reliable retirement income plan.
Yeah, that's right. And presents some intriguing information. Accumulating assets is one challenge. Turning those assets into sustainable income is another. So as you approach retirement, it becomes critical to answer questions like, how much income will you need? Where will it come from? And how will it adjust as the market fluctuates? So, you want to involve coordinating Social Security timing, understanding required minimum distributions, and then thinking about income sequencing as well.
Yeah, and it's that big shift. It's a complete 180 going from saving mode, where we're taking our income and turning it into a savings, which we're all used to. And I think we can automate that process. You get used to it. But then you enter retirement, you've got to switch completely to distribution mode, which is taking your savings and creating an income. And I think that's where people struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, that's perfectly stated, Tony. And, and the shift changes the math. So when you're accumulating, volatility can be uncomfortable but manageable. But when you're withdrawing, the sequence of returns matters much more. And so that's why thoughtful income structuring becomes so important in those final working years.
Yeah. And that's why people work with someone like yourself, Ashton. I think it's so important. So one thing we haven't touched on, but it comes into all these plans anytime you're talking about retirement strategies and money moves, and that's going to be one of your biggest expenses in retirement. That's healthcare. What do you want to tell us about that?
Healthcare planning becomes increasingly relevant as retirement approaches. It's not just about Medicare enrollment timelines, although those are important to make sure you get enrolled. It's about understanding how that healthcare cost fits into your long-term financial projections. Long-term care in particular can be one of the most significant financial variables in retirement. And so you don't necessarily need a specific product, but you do need a strategy. Planning doesn't eliminate the risk, but it does help reduce that uncertainty.
For sure. You got to make it part of the plan, as you always say. Yep. And you've said this on previous shows, no financial strategy can completely eliminate all risk, but there are steps you can take to reduce risk.
For sure. And another high impact move is stress testing your retirement plan. That means running projections under different assumptions. What if the market underperforms? What if tax laws change? What if you retire earlier than expected? So a plan that only works in best case scenarios really isn't a plan.
Right. No, it really isn't. It's more of a hope. And, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. Stress testing that plan gives you confidence that your strategy can withstand variability, which is inevitable in a plan.
Yeah. And I think that this brings us to a big one when we're talking about money moves and taxes. And that's the importance of working with a trusted financial services professional like yourself, correct?
Yeah, that's right, Tony. And it's not just because you're incapable of managing your own finances, but because retirement planning involves a lot of layers. It can be taxes, income strategy, healthcare, estate considerations, and market risk. We talked about taxes and healthcare already, and those arguably are the two largest expenses. One, you're going to pay the taxes, and the healthcare, you hope it's going to be as minimal as possible, but that long-term care can really be a big expense. So again, having someone to help coordinate those moving parts can provide that clarity, and that clarity can help reduce anxiety.
That's the key right there. Reducing anxiety. That's something you've talked about a lot on past shows and throughout today's show.
Yeah. If you look at today's episode as a whole, there's a clear theme here. In the first half, we discussed specific tax provisions, the new senior deduction, the importance of understanding its details and temporary nature. And then the second half, we've kind of broadened the lens a little bit. We've talked about proactive planning for people who are approaching retirement, revisiting those deductions, considering Roth strategies, building income timeframes, planning for healthcare, stress testing projections, and then seeking coordinated advice. So none of these moves are about chasing trends. They're about that preparation. So retirement isn't just a single decision. It's a sequence of decisions.
Yeah.
And the more intentional you are with it, Tony, and the years leading up to it, the more flexibility you may have once you get there. And so if you're already retired, it may be time to revisit your tax strategy. And if you're approaching retirement, it might be time to examine whether your runway is long enough and stable enough. But either way, the goal isn't perfection, it's clarity. We always, and as always, if you have questions about these strategies and how they might apply to your specific situation, that's where that personalized guidance matters the most.
Yeah, and it's that personalized that you mentioned there. I want to talk about that because everybody's situation is different. I know that's a point that you always try to drive home in every show. Everybody's situation is unique, which is why you can't give specific investment and financial advice out during the show, but you have to get to know somebody first as a fiduciary. It depends on their own goals, their timeline, a time horizon, where they're at, how much they have saved, when they're going to need the money, their family situation. There are so many pieces to the puzzle. And again, I use the analogy, you have 1,000-piece puzzle laying on a table in front of you. What's the most important piece? The box lid. And you're the box lid. You have that picture. Yeah. So many people have all these, their financial lives and everything involved with their retirement is like a huge 1,000-piece puzzle, but they don't have that final picture. Yeah. And you're there to bring that into focus for them so they're able to put the puzzle together and make the right choices and put the pieces in the right order, right?
Yeah, exactly, Tony. And that's a great summary. And, I actually just met with a client here before this recording of the show. And, she came to me with 5 to 10 different statements. And she said, Ashton, I'm looking to retire. Now is the time to try and get these a little bit more consolidated. And it's normal once you hit that retirement age to want to consolidate those things. And so,
sure.
You want to have thoughtful planning today because that can help you move into retirement with more confidence tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's really been an interesting and informative show today. And you covered so much. It's just really important for our listeners to understand you need a coach, a financial quarterback or coach. And that's where you come in. Ashton, you are the box lid. I'm just going to start calling you BL for short. You're the box lid that everyone needs to put the puzzle together. So, before we go, let our listeners out there know, number one, how they can get a hold of you and phone number, web address. You have a lot of resources you can offer. And I know you love hearing from our listeners to help answer their questions. And there are no bad questions. You're here to help them. How can our listeners out there set up that no charge, no obligation consultation?
Yeah, Tony. First, again, we talked about health planning and tax planning, and we can help you with both those. We have specialists for the healthcare side here. And then there is still time to do that tax planning before that tax filing deadline is the biggest thing. I know everybody's in kind of crunch time here as that tax filing deadline approaches, but there still is time to tax plan. Give our office a call, 952-873-2703. Again, that number is 952-873-2703. Visit us online at pankoninfinancial.com. That's PANKONIN financial.com. We'd love to help you protect your savings and feel confident about the road ahead.
All right. Well, Ashton, great show today. A lot of great information for our listeners out there. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. That does it for today's episode of the Pankonin Financial Perspective with our host, Ashton Pank.
Thank you for joining us for Pankonin Financial Perspective. Don't head into retirement without a plan for both your finances and your health. For more information, contact Ashton Pankonin at Pankonin Financial Group at 952-873-2703 or visit pankoninfinancialgroup.com. Join us again soon for another episode of Pankonin Financial Perspective. Advisory services are offered by Ashton Pankonin LLC DBA Pankonin Financial Group, an investment advisor in the state of Minnesota.
All matters discussed during the show are for informational purposes only. Each individual situation may vary and the opinions expressed here may not apply to everyone. Materials presented are believed to be from reliable sources and no representations can be made as to its accuracy. All ideas and information should be discussed in detail with one of our qualified representatives prior to implementation. We are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, the Federal Medicare Program, or any other government agency. Calling this number will direct you to a licensed sales agent.